Hi, my name is Sam Shabsin, and I'm a senior here at Kansas. Um, and during this video, I'm going just to reflect on Module 1 and share some of my thoughts from the different articles and videos and different activities that we've had just to do so far for this one module. So I guess I'll just go right into the first article. It was called Slavery, a Historical Overview. And in my mind, the main objective of the article is right in the title. It's just to give a historical overview of what slavery was from different perspectives. And I think that as an introduction to this course, this article suited me very well. It was a good transition and good introduction to some of the challenges um, and just problems in society that we're going to study and look upon this semester. Um, I thought that it was very interesting that that the author touched upon how black musicians and singers were more educated than other African American just citizens, and I guess it makes sense because their work revolved around their words and their vocabulary and just how they want to use words just to show creativity in their work. But it shocked me that there was a huge population of people, specifically African American people, who were illiterate or who just didn't have a formal education in their whole life. And so the article touches upon how slave owners really prohibited all kinds of formal education for their slaves because they believed that if their slaves gained education or could like communicate with each other in a more cohesive manner, that they would like revolt and have a revolution against their slave masters, and then they would lose all their power. And I thought that was very interesting because it showed, in a sense, of a way in which the slave owners would feel weak if their slaves were like equally matched with them in terms of communication. So it sort of showed them like taking a step back just to like prohibit something here so that they wouldn't be affected negatively by it later, which is very interesting because it sort of made it seem like that they thought that if they were able to communicate and if they had a formal education that they would have so much power and more power than the slave masters or the slave owners themselves. I thought that was very interesting. And then it also talked about a law in 1740 that prohibited slaves to read and write, and I think that that was generally because the majority of the elitists in the government were white and were male and generally had or owned slaves. Um, so it was just a way in which legally they could prohibit their slaves. So it wouldn't be more of like an opinionated thing or like it would be more required in this way in a sense. Um, and then so some towns had some schools for slaves, not all of them, which I thought was a little interesting because it was sort of like a national law, and the article touched on it, and it said that those towns were mainly towns that had a lot of African American citizens, and not a lot of white support, which I guess makes sense because they were very against education. Um, and then it also touched about some of the work that slaves would have to do on the plantation, and I just thought that it was very interesting that most of the work was taught by the generation before them. So, like for instance, a young child would learn how to work the field from his parents, and their parents learned it from their parents, and it was like it's a very generational tie thing. And I guess I never really thought about how the generations of slaveries moved around within one slave ownership. So I just thought that that was very interesting too. Um, and there were some statistics that were very interesting um, about the percentage of people from Boston that were illiterate, the amount of people, the African American people from Boston, and it said less than 8% of all African American people from Boston were illiterate, but only 5% of them could read, and those statistics are or like those percentages are very different So there's just a huge range. So it's obvious that communicating verbally was much more popular than communicating on paper or just even being able to read. So I thought that was really interesting too. I thought that they would sort of go hand in hand, but in this case, it's interesting that they sort of counteract each other. Um, and then in actual education, the next work, I learned that the way that different people view slavery can change their opinion on it. So, for instance, not everybody who was white was for slavery. There were many people who spoke out, even like against their own people, and I'm sure that that took a lot of bravery and courage, because that's not something that you would want to do, especially showing you're already on like the higher side. You're like you have more power in that society. So dropping down and supporting shows that you really take a lot out of yourself to support this group. So that's like a huge message for the minority, especially here, the African American community back then. Um, and yeah, so I guess another thing, especially found in the video, it talked a lot about more of some of the work that slaves would do around the house and around like a plantation. And um, I remember learning about this in high school and in other classes here in college about the cotton gin and about how the cotton demand went way up. The popularity increased by so much once the cotton gin came out, and that sort of allowed it to be produced in a much quicker and much in much higher quantities. So it really allowed that process to be much more efficient. And yeah, I just found that very interesting too. I think that Module 1 was very informative, and I had a good time. I learned a lot, and I'm very excited to see how the rest of the semester goes in this class. So thank you.